2 Samuel chapter 18. Then David mustered the people who were with him and set commanders of thousands and captains of hundreds over them. Then David sent out the troops, 1/3 under the command of Joab, 1/3 under the command of Joab's brother Abishai, son of Zeruiah, and 1/3 under the command of Ittai the Gittite. The king said to the troops, I must certainly go out with you also. But the troops said, You must not go out, for if we were to flee, they would not care about us. Even if half of us die, they still wouldn't care about us. But you are worth 10,000 of us. Therefore, now it is better that you be ready to support us from the city. Then the king said to them, Whatever seems best to you, I will do. So the king stood beside the gate, and all the troops went out by their hundreds and thousands. Then the king charged Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, saying, Deal gently with the young man Absalom for my sake. Now all the troops heard the king's charge to all the commanders concerning Absalom. Then the troops went out to the field to confront Israel, but the battle took place in the forest of Ephraim. The people of Israel were defeated there before the followers of David, and the slaughter that day was great, 20,000 men. For the battle there was spread over the face of the entire countryside, and the forest devoured more people that day than the sword devoured. Now Absalom encountered some of the David's servants. When Absalom was riding on his mule, the mule went under the thick branches of the great oak, and his head got caught in the oak, so that he was left hanging between heaven and earth, while the mule that was under him went on. Then a certain man saw it and told Joab, saying, Look, I saw Absalom hanging in an oak. Then Joab said to his informant, Look here, you saw him, so why didn't you strike him there to the ground? I would have given you 10 pieces of silver and a belt. But the man said to Joab, Even if I had 1,000 pieces of silver in my hand, I would not raise my hand against the king's son. For in our hearing the king charged you, Abishai and Ittai, saying, Watch over the young man Absalom for me. Otherwise I would have betrayed his soul, and nothing stays hidden from the king, and you yourself would have stood aloof. I won't wait for you, Joab said. So he took 3 darts in his hand and thrust them through Absalom's heart while he was yet alive in the midst of the oak. Then 10 young men who were Joab's armor-bearers surrounded Absalom, struck and finished him off. Then Joab blew the shofar, and the troops returned from pursuing Israel, for Joab held back the troops. They took Absalom and threw him into a deep pit in the forest, and piled over him a very large heap of stones. Then all Israel fled, everyone to his tent. Now Absalom in his lifetime had taken and set up for himself a pillar, which is in the king's valley, for he said, I have no son to preserve the memory of my name. So he called the pillar by his name, and has been called Absalom's monument to this day. Then Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, said, Let me now run and bring the king's news that Adonai has vindicated him against the hand of his enemies. But Joab said to him, You are not to be the bearer of the news today. You may do it another day, but today you shall bear no news, for the king's son is dead. And Joab said to the Cushite, Go tell the king what you have seen. So the Cushite bowed to Joab and took off running. But Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, once again said to Joab, Whatever happens, please let me also run after the Cushite. Why should you run, my son? Joab said, since you would have no news worth telling. Whatever may come of it, I want to run. So he said to him, Run. Ahimaaz ran by the way of the plain, and so passed the Cushite. Now David was sitting between the 2 gates. When the watchman on the roof over the gate walked over to the wall, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and all of a sudden he saw a man running alone. The watchman cried out and told the king. The king said, If he is alone, there is good news in his mouth. So he came closer and closer. Then the watchman saw another man running. So the watchman called out to the gatekeeper and said, Look, another man is running alone. The king said, He too is bringing good news. Then the watchman said, I can see that the running of the first one is like the running of Ahimaaz, son of Zadok. This is a good man, and he comes with good news. The king replied, Then Ahimaaz called out and said to the king, Shalom. Then he prostrated himself before the king with his face to the ground and said, Blessed be Adonai your God, who has given over the men who lifted up their hand against my lord the king. Then the king asked, Is it well with the young man Absalom? Ahimaaz answered, I saw a great tumult when the king's servant Joab sent me, your servant, but I did not know what it was about. Step aside and stand here, the king said. So he stepped aside and stood still. Then the Cushite arrived and said, Let my lord the king receive good news, for Adonai has vindicated you today against all who rose up against you. Then the king asked the Cushite, Is it well with the young man Absalom? The Cushite answered, Let the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise up against you for evil be as that young man. Chapter 19. The king was shaken, so he went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. As he walked, he cried, My son Absalom, O my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you, Absalom, my son, my son. Then Joab was told, Look, the king is weeping and mourning over Absalom. So the victory that day was turned into mourning for all the troops, for the troops heard it, said that day, The king is grieving over his son. So the troops entered into the city stealthily that day, like troops who were ashamed after running away in battle. The king covered his face and cried with a loud voice, My son Absalom, O Absalom, my son, my son. Then Joab came into the house to the king and said, Today you have humiliated all your servants, who this day have saved your life, the lives of your sons and daughters, and the lives of your wives, and the lives of your concubines, by loving those who hate you and hating those who love you. For you have shown today that officers and officials are nothing to you. For today I realize that if Absalom were alive and all of us were dead, then it would have pleased you well. So now arise, go out and speak to the heart of your servants. For I swear by Adonai that if you do not go out, not a single man will stay with you tonight, and that will be worse for you than all the evil that has befallen you from your youth until now. So the king arose and sat in the gate. When they told all the troops, saying, See, the king is sitting at the gate, all the troops presented themselves before the king. Meanwhile, Israel had fled each man to his tent. All the people throughout all the tribes of Israel were at strife, saying, The king delivered us from the hand of our enemies, and he saved us from the hand of the Philistines. Yet now he had to flee from the land because of Absalom. But Absalom, whom we anointed over us, has died in battle. So why are we silent about restoring the king? Then King David sent word to Zadok and Abiathar the Kohanim, saying, Speak to the elders of Judah, saying, Why should you be the last to bring the king back to his palace? The talk of all Israel had reached the king at his residence. You are my kinsman, my bone and my flesh. Why then should you be the last to bring back the king? Also say to Amasa, Are you not my bone and my flesh? May God do so to me, and even more, if you do not become my army commander before me continually in place of Joab. Thus he turned the heart of all the men of Judah as one, and then they sent word to the king, Come back, you and all your servants. So the king returned and reached the Jordan. Meanwhile, Judah came to Gilgal in order to meet the king, to escort the king over the Jordan. Then Shimei, son of Gera, the Benjamite, who was from Bephurim, hurried and came down with the men of Judah to meet King David, accompanied by 1,000 men of Benjamin. Also Ziba, the servant of Shaul's household, with his 15 sons and 20 slaves, rushed to the Jordan ahead of the king. They ferried across the ford to bring the king's household, and they did whatever seemed good in his eyes. Now Shimei, son of Gera, fell down before the king when he was crossing over the Jordan. So he implored the king, Let my lord not hold me guilty, and not remember the iniquity that your servant committed on the day my lord the king left Jerusalem. Let the king not take it to his heart, for your servant knows that I have sinned. So behold, I have come today, the first of all the house of Joseph, to go down to meet my lord the king. But Abishai son of Zeruiah answered and said, Shouldn't Shimei be put to death for this, because he cursed Adonai's anointed? But David said, What have I to do with you, sons of Zeruiah, that you should be my adversary today? Should any man be put to death in Israel this day? Don't I know that today I am king over Israel? Then the king said to Shimei, You shall not die. And the king swore it to him. Then Mephibosheth, son of Shaul, came down to meet the king. Now he had neither dressed his feet, nor trimmed his beard, nor washed his clothes from the day the king departed until the day he came home in Shalom. Now it came to pass when he came from Jerusalem to meet the king asked him, Why did you not go with me, Mephibosheth? My lord the king, my own servant deceived me, he answered. For your servant hath said, I will saddle a donkey for myself, ride on it, and go with the king, because your servant is lame. However, he has slandered your servant to my lord the king. But my lord the king is like an angel of God. So do what is good in your eyes, for all my father's household deserved only death at the hand of my lord the king. Yet you set your servant among those eating at your own table. What right do I have yet to cry to the king? Then the king said to him, Why do you still speak of your affairs? I have decreed you and Ziba shall divide the land. So let him take all. Mephibosheth replied to the king, As long as my lord the king has come back to his own home in Shalom. Then Barzillai the Gileadite came down from Rogelim, and he approached the Jordan with the king to escort him over the Jordan. Now Barzillai was a very aged man, 80 years old, and he had provided for the king during his residence at Mahanaim, for he was a very wealthy man. The king said to Barzillai, Cross over with me, and I will provide for you with me in Jerusalem. But Barzillai said to the king, How many years are left of my life that I should go up with the king to Jerusalem? I am now 80 years old. Can I distinguish between good and bad? Can your servant taste what I eat and what I drink? Can I listen any more to the voice of singing men and women? Why then should your servant be yet a burden to my lord the king? Your servant would merely cross over the Jordan with the king. But why should the king reward me with such a reward? Please let your servant go back, and let me die in your own hometown, near the grave of my father and my mother. But look, here is your servant, Chimham. Let him cross over with my lord the king, and do for him what seems good in your eyes. The king answered, Chimham will cross over with me, and I will do for him what seems good in your eyes. Whatever you ask of me, I will do for you. When all the people had crossed over the Jordan, and as the king was about to cross over, the king kissed Barzillai and blessed him. So he returned to his own place. Then the king crossed over to Gilgal, and Chimham and all the people of Judah crossed over with him, and also half the people of Israel escorted the king over. Then all the men of Israel came to the king and said to him, Why did our brothers, the men of Judah, steal you away by escorting the king and his household over the Jordan, along with all the David's men that were with him? Then all the men of Judah answered the men of Israel, Because the king is our close relative. So why are you angry over this matter? Have you eaten at all the king's cost, or has he given us any gifts? Then the men of Israel answered the men of Judah and said, We have 10 shares in the king, so in David we have even more than you. Why then did you despise us? Weren't we the first to speak of restoring our king? Yet the words of the men of Judah were harsher than the words of the men of Israel. Chapter 20. Now a worthless fellow happened to be there, a Benjamite named Sheba, son of Bichri. He blew the shofar and said, We have no portion in David, no inheritance in the sons of Jesse. Son of Jesse, every man to his tent, O Israel. So all the men of Israel withdrew from following David and followed Sheba, son of Bichri. But the men of Judah kept close to their king from the Jordan to Jerusalem. Now, when David arrived at his place in Jerusalem, the king took the 10 women, the concubines whom he had left to take care of the palace, and put them in a guarded house. He provided for them, but he did not cohabit with them. So they were confined until the day they died, living in widowhood. Then the king said to Amasa, "Summon to me the men of Judah within 3 days, and be here yourself." So Amasa went to summon Judah, but he took longer than the set time that he had allotted him. Then David said to Abishai, "Now Sheba son of Bichri will do us more harm than Absalom. So take your Lord's servants and pursue him, lest he find for himself fortified cities and escape from our sight." So Joab's men went after him, along with the Cherethites, the Pelethites, and all the mighty men, and set out from Jerusalem to pursue Sheba son of Bichri. When they were at the great stone that is in Gibeon, Amasa came to meet them. Now Joab was dressed in his military uniform, and over it was a belt with a sword in its sheath fastened on his waist. And as he stepped forward, it fell out. Then Joab said to Amasa, "It is well with my brother. Is it well with you, my brother?" With his right hand Joab took Amasa by the beard to kiss him, but Amasa took no heed to the sword that was in Joab's other hand. So he stabbed him with it in the groin and poured out his entrails to the ground, and did not strike him again, for he died. Then Joab and his brother Abishai pursued Sheba son of Bichri. Meanwhile, one of Joab's young men stood over Amasa and said, "Whoever favors Joab and whoever is for David, let him follow Joab." Yet Amasa lay wallowing in his blood in the midst of the highway. So when the man saw that all the people stood still, the man saw that all the people stood still, he dragged Amasa from the highway into the field and threw a garment over him, because he saw that everyone passing by him paused. Once he removed him from the highway, everyone passed on, following Joab to pursue Sheba son of Bichri. Now he went through all the tribes of Israel to Abel and Beth Makkah. All the Berites gathered together and indeed followed him. They came and besieged him in Abel of Beth Makkah and cast up a siege ramp against the city. It stood against the outer fortification, and all the people with Joab battered the wall in order to topple it. Then a wise woman cried out from the city, "Listen, listen, please tell Joab to come over here that I may speak with him." Then he approached her. The woman asked, "Are you Joab?" "I am," he answered. Then she said to him, "Listen to the words of your handmaid." "I am listening." Then she spoke up, saying, "They used to say in old time, 'They shall surely seek counsel at Abel,' and that's how they settled any dispute. I am of those who are peaceable and faithful in Israel. Are you seeking to destroy a mother city in Israel? Why would you devour Adonai's inheritance?" Joab replied, saying, "Never, far be it from me that I would devour up or ruin. The matter is not so, but a fellow from the hill country of Ephraim, Sheba son of Bichri his name, has lifted up his hand against King David. Give him up alone, and I will withdraw from the city." So the woman replied to Joab, "Look here, his head will be thrown to you over the wall." Then the woman approached all the people wisely. So they cut off the head of Sheba son of Bichri and threw it over to Joab. He then blew the shofar, and they were dismissed from the city, each to his tent. Then Joab returned to Jerusalem to the king. Now Joab remained over all the army of Israel. Benaiah son of Jehoiada was over the Cherethites and the Pelethites. Adoram was over the forced labor. Jehoshaphat son of Ahilud was the recorder. Sheba was scribe. Zadok and Abiathar were Kohanim, and Ira and Jairite also was a Kohen to David.